Let's run through them. Obviously, Antrim have been relegated, but how do we think Darren Gleeson did? Now, they came up in a blaze of glory by doing quite well in the league, getting those positive results against a couple of teams. Obviously, it beat Clare, drew with Wexford. Then they came into the championship, got absolutely hockeyed by Dublin, and then underperformed, I would say, for a lot of the match against Laois, which, credit to Laois and James Cheddar Plunkett there. It's actually kind of hard to know here on this one.
It's a tricky one because what was the ultimate goal for the two ultimate goals for the year were
not get relegated.
Yeah, retain Division 1 status, which they did, and not go back down to Joe McDonagh. And they went back down to Joe McDonagh. So I think you have to take it on a balance for the whole year. Some of the league stuff, some of the league performances were great. Beat Clare, drew at Wexford. I would say they totally flopped in championship though. You'd have to say they were disappointing. And while they fought manfully against Laois were the ones that really brought it that day on the biggest game of the year. So I'd be looking at probably something like a straight C.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think you put him much lower than that because Antrim, obviously, they're making that comeback in. They got 5 points out of 10 in their league outing, so that's pretty good. And yeah, very disappointing performance. To concede 331 to Dublin, they put up 22 points themselves, but 331 it is the mother and father of a beating, really, in that sense. And then also conceded 227 against Laois. So at the back, they're very, very porous. But I think a C. Are we going to go like A plus, A minus, C plus, C minus?
Yeah, straight. Like it's either a straight A or it's an A plus or an A minus. So I think C is fair. Like if they'd stayed up, it'd probably be getting a B plus. Like.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going with a flat C then.
Flat C. Yeah.
Flat C.
C is that? What's that? Is that a C? C2? C2, I think they used to call it back in the day.
You should know. You did your Leaving Cert 3 times.
C2, 65 points in the Leaving Cert. I got many of them back in the day.
Okay, then let's move on to the next team. We've looked at Darren Gleeson. So Cork and Kieran Kingston. Right. So these are always awkward ones, and people get your comments in and let us know what you think. But they did pretty well in terms of getting to an All-Ireland final. But they lost the first day out to Limerick, gave a decent enough performance considering, lost by 8 points. Then en route to the All-Ireland final, they beat Clare, they beat Dublin, and they beat Kilkenny after extra time. So looking at the quality of teams they beat on the way, as I said, Clare, Dublin, and Kilkenny, I wouldn't consider any of them teams that were going to win the All-Ireland this year, and they lost their one Munster game. Then the league, how much does the league count? But they won 2, drew 1, and lost 2. I'm thinking getting to an All-Ireland final is really good, but I'm not blown away by who they beat. So I'd be thinking B minus.
You read me mind. B minus. I was all over a B minus. If they'd performed creditably.
Look, everyone's coming in the same thing, except for skills, P45.
I think B minus is very fair. If they'd performed well in an All-Ireland final, you would have, you would have been probably bumping it up to, a B plus. It's been beaten 6 or 7 points maybe in an All-Ireland final. But I think B minus is more than fair. You have to take into account, when we were looking at the power rankings, they obviously were, destroyed by Limerick in the All-Ireland final. Destroyed by Limerick 3 times this year. Not destroyed, but definitely twice. League and Championship, the All-Ireland final, and the Munster semi-final, they were beaten by 8. They didn't play Waterford. They didn't beat a Waterford team that we ranked very highly. They didn't beat a Tip team that we ranked very highly. They beat teams that were further down the pecking order, I would say. So I think B minus is more than fair.
But they did kind of the margin of defeat in the All-Ireland final. They should never be losing that game by 16 points. And the way they set up means that what happened on the sideline is the reason that they lost by 16 points. So you could argue that. Yeah, I still think B minus is fair for just getting that far. I suppose we both have that gut instinct of B minus, so we'll stick with that. Yeah. Brian Lohan and Clare. Let's just look. League, losing the first day out to Antrim very much put them kind of behind the 8 ball there, 121 to 22 points. But they did recover. They lost 1 more league game, but they did win 3, which is pretty good going. Then in the Munster Championship, beat Waterford, a somewhat weakened Waterford, but they were definitely the better team that first day out. Then they went and beat Davey Fitzgerald in that grudge match with Wexford before losing out to Cork. So What are you thinking for Lohan? I think the public is certainly massively backing him there.
Yeah, the expectations of all the managers this year, the expectations wouldn't have been too high. I do think he exceeded expectations somewhat. Not even like, but it's just they obviously beat Waterford and they could have beaten Cork, but it was the nature of the performances. They lost the Tip that day. The Aidan McCarthy sin bin obviously had a big play in that, but it was I would say the quality of the performances and what they were actually showing on the pitch was really, really positive, I have to say. It exceeded what I thought they could achieve this year. And that's probably 2 years in a row that he's done that. So I'd probably be looking at a B for Brian Lohan if I'm honest. Did I think if they could have beaten Cork? They didn't, obviously, but they could have, and they could have been them that got through the back door through to the All-Ireland final, and that wouldn't have been a surprise. And I think when you look at where you think they're going to be for 2022 now, you're thinking they're in quite a good position. And I think, in fairness to him, he's galvanised it big time, and he's done a good job in the 2 years so far.
When we saw the pictures of Cahill Lohan, their training centre last winter, and it looks, it's highly unimpressive, let's put it that way. And this notion that maybe he's kind of got his hands tied behind his back in terms of what he's dealing with in other ways, and maybe they're not the most modern county board. Does that make it even more impressive what he's done, considering they had a number of seasons with Davey Fitz, won in All-Ireland, but other than that they didn't have too many strong seasons with him. Donal Maloney and Jerry O'Connor, not overly impressive, and didn't feel like this team was really massively going somewhere. He's taken what felt like a ship that was taken on water, and all of a sudden I'm pushing for a B+ because it's just the manner of it, and it looks like all the players are behind him, and he's found lads that other people wouldn't necessarily rate, and he's turned them into effective players. So I'm thinking B+.
I don't disagree, because he's basically starting a 100-meter race at the 110-meter start, essentially. He's starting behind everybody else. That's what it looks like. That's everything we're hearing. All the shenanigans behind the scenes that has to play into it. So yeah, I'm okay with a B+. Yeah. The only thing that would pull against that is that, what did they win? They won 2 championship games, in fairness. Beaten by Tip, beaten by Cork. Yeah, listen, but it was the nature of the defeats that would actually please you from a Clare point of view. That they were never dying against Tipperary after a real game-changing scenario, and that they were still fighting so hard at the end against Cork. So I'm okay with a B+.
Yeah, like at the start of the season, I'd say we were ranking them down around 8th or 9th, weren't we?
Yeah, we were, definitely, yeah.
And they've moved up through the ranks, but I would have said, he hasn't got as strong a hand as others. So yeah, I'm happy to give him a B+ there. We'll move on to the next one, Matty Kenny with Dublin. So that brilliant, obviously the league, pardon me.
I love this, because it's just like, you're just going to have to tell it like it is now.
Look, I'll give the upside and then you can give the reality. So they won 2 out of 5 league games in what was the weaker side of the league. So no doubt about that. Then they went and hammered Antrim. You'd expect them to beat Antrim, but there were some people, and maybe he's in a split screen beside me, that were suggesting maybe Antrim could win that game. And I says, by God, they won't. So they won that game, putting up 331. So, when you have people, detractors, that's a pretty good answer. Then they beat Galway 118.
You didn't have any faith in them when they were playing Galway. The faith wasn't retained that day, I can tell you that.
No, so he exceeded your expectations the first day, mine the second day, then COVID struck, and obviously then they lost to Kilkenny, being down 4 players, including their key men at the front and the back. They had injuries to Owen O'Donnell, obviously. Mark Schutte went off injured at half-time. So their team was torn apart that way. They still only lost the Leinster final by 9 points. Kilkenny getting 1-6 off the bench, if you include Alan Murphy winning the penalty, which was converted by TJ Reid, of course. And then they went on and they were beaten by Cork in the qualifier. And, you'd have to say they were beating all ends up that day, 226 to 24 points. Didn't give up now, but they were outclassed that day. So to me, I think overall, is it progress? Is there a good reason why the Dublin County Board have looked for Matty to stay on another year? I'm looking at C+.
I don't know about C+. C was what immediately came to my mind. I tell you what, the COVID thing can't be underestimated, because it totally put a spanner in the works for a Leinster final that I'm sure Kilkenny people would have been a bit nervous about. I would say anyway, because Dublin were obviously coming with a head of steam after 2 really, really good results. It's probably thereafter, and it's probably the Cork game that just wasn't quite as bad as last year, but it was pretty bad.
Well, what about this though? Ronan Hayes had obviously missed a lot of training and the previous game because of the COVID situation. He left maybe 1-3 behind him at the start of the game, which I think if he was sharp and hadn't missed that much training, he would have nailed in. And then they would have started the game the way they should have. So their hands were kind of tight, but I do agree it was a fairly flat one.
It's ifs and buts as well, though. You know, like teams.
Good point there from Will.
Yeah, but Kenny has managed to get some lads playing their best hurling in 5 years. Yeah, no, Sutcliffe has definitely gotten him back to we've been talking about getting Danny Sutcliffe back to 2013 levels for 8 years now, and I'd say this year probably wasn't too far off, even though probably James Matter did get on top of him in that Leinster final by the end of it. I'd still be looking at a C. To be honest with you, what were you looking for? A C+?
I was looking for a C+. And do you know what? There's a good few comments that are either like there's B- there. I put them up on screen. There's like been B-, C-, C+. They're all in and around the same neck of the woods. So would you help a lad out here and go with the C+?
I'll go with the C+ because a lot of people are saying B-. I think that's okay. There is just another in the plus column for Matty. He got Liam Rush back fit and back hurling pretty well, in fairness. And you'd imagine if he can stay fit and he'd have a club campaign with Nafeen under his belt, that he might be better again even next year. He did get a lot, like, in fairness, another one in the plus column. When Owen O'Donnell was fit, they were brilliant. When he was missing, and we have ranked him in the top 10 hurlers before, so they were missing one of the best hurlers in the country for a couple of their biggest games of the year. So fair point. And I think when you take that into account and you take COVID into account, they acquitted themselves, quite well, in fairness.
Yeah. So Colm Cronin, I'm wondering, is this Coola Colm Cronin, who's now living in Australia? Let me know if it is. I'd say with the 12-hour and the fact that he's a doctor, I think it's unlikely that it's him, but let us know which Colm Cronin you are. So Shane O'Neill in Galway, and he jumped straight in. Galway have to get an F for me. Got to do it on a curve. Like, do you? I mean, I do think Shane O'Neill's marking isn't going to be particularly good here because, I mean, just look at the performances. A couple of times in the league, you were like, okay, maybe there's something coming here.
Okay, I like what you're doing here.
Okay, but then come championship, they weren't at the races. They were fairly far behind, and I mean, D would even be generous here.
Yeah, they topped their league group and looked really good coming into the championship. We had them ranked as number 2, I think. Just on something Nisha says there, I would go back to that. Starting O'Donnell in that Leinster final was madness because it essentially ruled him out of the qualifiers. So that's probably something going against Matty and Nisha having a slight dig at a former manager as well.
We were doing the intercert. There's some lads saying that they don't even use the point system that we're talking about anymore.
Right? These are just what are they called now? Is it predictive grades or whatever? So you can just if we get on well with someone, you can just give them a real good grade. They don't have to go through the exams or sit anything like that. But on Shane O'Neill, yeah, league was good. Looked like they were going to be big contenders for the All-Ireland, and then there's no point in saying any different. They totally flunked out in championship. Totally flunked out. Like, what do you think? Like, it was so underwhelming what they delivered in championship compared to what we expected them to deliver.
It was awful. We had them rated as number 2 in the country, and like when you have a team rated as number 2 and by the end of the season their results are kind of as follows. Let me just kind of bring them up here. I've kind of already mentioned the 118 to 114 loss to Dublin the first day out. Then they go and play Waterford and concede 130. Obviously they were 16 points behind and eventually brought it back somewhat close with that fairly epic sort of comeback. It's very hard to make a case for Galway being above, I would say, an E. like I think D- might be the best. ML89 says D-, but honestly an F wouldn't be unwarranted. F- for O'Neill, says Mark Corcoran. Galway totally peaked at the wrong time. That might be on O'Neill. Maybe a D- for league form, but that proved to be worthless in the end. And then no grades as well.
Oh, no grade. Got one of them back in the day. Actually got an E in accounting back in the day. I was too stubborn not to go back and do pass. So I said I might as well fail honours.
Do you know what? When we had them rated as second, and both confidently rated them as second, now maybe we were just way out. We're really wrong for that. What are the positives? What are the positives for the season? When we had them rated as second. Couldn't get through Leinster.
Kind of clutching here. Darren Morrissey, maybe Jack Fitzpatrick, Conor Whelan's performances when everyone else was sinking around him. Jeez, I'm struggling outside of that, to be honest with you. And and the fact that he's gone now amid a bit of a cloud would suggest that all was not right. That all was not right. And anecdotally, I've heard that all was not right, even with some of the coaching staff and things like that. So you're definitely looking down towards the bottom end, aren't you? Is a D generous?
I think it is. Yeah, I mean, because this is the amateur world, you probably end up trying to not be harsh. But like as one of the comments said, if this isn't an F, I'm not kind of sure what is. But like, it's tough coming in as an outside manager when things aren't going right. Shane O'Neill did, to me, I always thought this guy is going to be a class manager because of what he did with Napiershik. So I do really, really rate him. He's clearly a very intelligent guy. Things didn't work out for him. But I think we're going to have to go with an F just on the basis of with all that talent, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, it is. I think it is overly harsh now because at least there was a rally at the end of the Waterford game. They could have been beaten 20 points by Waterford that day. Whether that's him or whether that's the players, I'm not sure. But
so from number 2 to we're rating them, what was it, something like 7th or 8th there at the end of the season.
Based on the potential that they have, it was an awful season. There's no point in saying any difference. It was a horrible season. With when you look at Dottie Burke, the Manions,
Whelan,
Joe Canning, Whelan, Brian Kincannon. Do you know I was tipping Brian Kincannon for hurler of the year at the start of the year,
and rightly so. He's class.
So I go with an E.
Okay, I'll meet you with an E. I think it'd be harsh to put it all on O'Neill.
I think an F is too much, and I will say, I know we're rating the managers here, but the players do have to take some responsibility for the performances as well.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of people with the knives out in their comments, and O'Neill will bounce back, says Mark.
100%. I totally agree, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he's a future Limerick manager. Yeah,
no credit for that comeback, boys, says Joe Butler. There is a certain amount of comeback or credit for that, but the red card to Conor Gleeson obviously helped that too. Verney with a Sports Direct mug. That Cork money coming through for next year's propaganda. Cork have bought him off.
Far from it. It's just I hate like a glass that can only hold 300 mils or something like that. I have a lovely friend's mug. I know, waste of time.
You wouldn't have much time for that.
No, but you end up having to fill it. Like it's grand for drinking coffee or something like that.
Which is what I was doing.
I got my sister a friend's mug, and it's a monster of a yoke, and it holds about 800 mils of water. If you're drinking any less than a pint of water, waste of time.
Will, maybe biased or based on historical events, managers in Galway should get cut a bit of slack. They seem to be a difficult county to manage. So to be fair to Micheál Donoghue and Anthony Cunningham getting to a couple of All-Ireland finals before that, yeah, a couple of them they are working against that. But even so, with the talent, you have to rate it on that. Brian Cody with Kilkenny.
Yeah, you said it earlier, something about them that people were going against them or something like that. What I was saying, down in Kilkenny, they go against him. They don't go.
No, they go against him. Of course,
they go against him. Okay. League campaign. I think they lost one game, the last game against Clare.
On the handier side of the league.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, on the handier side. So they won 4 out of 5 games. They were joint league winners. They beat Wexford after an epic game. Wexford, as it would subsequently transpire, are well down the pecking order nationally and third or fourth in line in Leinster. They beat a COVID hit Dublin team in the Leinster final, and not that convincingly. In fairness, not that convincingly. Well, was it 4 or 6 in the wind up, and it was tight?
In the Leinster final, it was 9.
Was it 9? Was it 9 in the wind up?
It was. Yeah, it was 125 to 19.
Okay, so it was. They pulled away in the wind up. Semi-final looked, to have some control against Cork. Then the game totally went against them. And whether it was tactics that Brian Cody employed or what the players did, they totally got themselves back into the game when it looked like they were going to get beaten out. I thought they were going to get beaten 10 or 15 points on the hour mark. They were 6 down, weren't they? And they were in all sorts of trouble. And they managed to pull a draw with that somehow. I don't know how they did. And Jack O'Connor's goal was probably the difference in extra time. I think a B would be a stretch.
So if it's the sort of worst Kilkenny team that he's ever had, getting to an All-Ireland semi-final and going all the way to extra time, nice comeback in the game and everything to take it there, won a Leinster title that includes Galway, Dublin and Wexford in the championship.
You have to take into account the quality of the team they beat, or that they played. Like Wexford are below them in Leinster, Dublin are below them in Leinster, Cork are on a par with them. They didn't have to play Limerick, they didn't have to play Tip, they didn't have to play Waterford. I would find it hard to give them a B, I have to say. I'd probably be looking at maybe a C+.
Yeah, and that seems to be what's coming in here. Cody C+. Yeah, I think so. And if we give them any less than Matty Kenny, people would be saying, well, what's going on here? They obviously got a lot further, but part of the COVID issues that very much kind of hamstrung Dublin have to be built into that. So friend of a friend was DJ in Kilkenny City in the 90s. Lad came up to him and asked, do you have any Rage Against the Machine?
That's brilliant.
Lionel Strongjaw, back-to-back provincial titles should count for something. B- for Cody, says ML89. Still won 2 trophies at the end of the day, even if one of them was shared. You're judging Cody on past seasons again. On this year alone, getting to an All-Ireland semi-final, losing an extra time, and league champions deserves better than a C. I'm happy to go with C+.
C+ is a decent grade. Like I was happy getting that 70 points anytime I got a C+.
And the reason that I wouldn't go any higher is I don't necessarily see that like Owen Cody has kicked on to the next level. I'm not sure if enough players, like James Maher's come in, he's probably put his hand up for a wing-back slot now. I'm not sure if too many players have kind of kicked on to the next level, or if, because we're still saying midfield and a couple of forward and back players. I'm not really sure if they're there yet. So
yeah, in fairness to Cody, I don't know what happened for James Maher to be dropped, but he was recalled and he was one of their best players this year. Yeah.
Okay, moving on then. Cheddar, Plunkett and Laois. Everyone was projecting that Laois were going to be at nothing this year. They lost all 5 of their league games. What does that count for? God knows at this stage. But in the championship then, they were beaten fairly heavily the first day out, 531 to 123. And remember, they just gave all the puck outs to Wexford, stood off and watched Wexford walk the ball out, allowed them to position or hit the ball into whoever they want, and they got absolutely paddled. Like 531, like that's 46 points when you convert it. We hammered them for that, but they did go and win the game that they had to win, which was the one against Antrim. They won 227 to 221. They were down to 13 men for a short while because there was a red card and a black card. And then they saw it out. They kind of took the comeback from Antrim and kicked on. And then they performed really well against Waterford, kind of belying the expectations of everyone, which was that it was going to be a beatdown. And they only lost by 5 points. So to me, when you look at where things were going, obviously what happened with Eddie Brennan leaving over the winter, geez, I think that's not far off a B.
I put it to you this way. We talked about like what were the goals for the season. Retain Division 1 status. They did that. They beat Westmeath in the last game of the year and retain Liam McCarthy Cup status. They did that. They did that while putting in a massive performance against Waterford. I don't know. Like I think like the league games, you nearly have to kind of write them off, and you nearly kind of have to write off the Wexford game in many ways. Their final 3 games of the year, were 5-point beaten by a Waterford side that we really rate. A good performance against Antrim when they really needed it. And in fairness, I think Westmeath were down to 14 men for that Division 1 relegation playoff. But they pulled out a result, having looked in all sorts of trouble in that game as well, with PJ Scully on fire up front. So, yeah, it's kind of funny.
Too much?
Yeah, said, I think it might be. I think it might be a bit much because everything that preceded it was so bad. Like, was very bad. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. But we firmly had them rated as number 11, so it's definitely in the honours category of ratings that we're going to have to give them.
Oh, like they'd say back in the day. Oh, did you get the honour? Oh, I got the honour. I think I would give them an honour. I give Cheddar a good C. I'd say probably leaning towards the plus, because with players that were out injured and that were unavailable to them, I think we had kind of written off their year, hadn't we? Particularly after the Wexford game. And in fairness, they managed to turn it around. Everything that we saw, if you were to rate them after the Wexford game, it was a straight up F. Like it was a straight up F. But I suppose when it really mattered at the business end of the championship, they were able to totally turn around things. So I think a C+ is fair.
Yeah. Pádraig Gill, having seen a lot of smart arses from Tipperary, and Cody has finally done the drive for 5, now 6 years without an All-Ireland. Mikey Carey going off again Cork, that killed Kilkenny in that semi-final, says Nisha, who is, of course, a Kilkenny native. C+ would be kind, a C+ for Cheddar's cap. Plunkett laid the foundation.
A C+ for Cheddar's cap. Like, I tell you what, I give him an A+ for managing to wear the attire that he wears on a blistering summer day. It's phenomenal.
So did Plunkett turn the season around, or did the team just hurl her away to form, says Adrian McGrath. Niall Heffernan, A+ for boiler suit.
I totally agree. Like, it's phenomenal, really.
It is indeed. John Kiley, A. We just leave it at that. First ever back-to-back All-Irelands. Hammering teams. Comeback against Tip. Do you look at a comeback, or do you say, oh, they left themselves vulnerable for a half an hour?
What type of an A?
I mean, they were dominant, so A+.
Yeah, I thought you were just looking to give him an A, and I do think A+ again. Like, A+, they delivered like one of the great All-Ireland final performances. And in fairness to them, like he had said, it looked kind of ropey maybe during the league, but by the end of the league, we knew where they were. By the end, by that Cork game, we knew, okay, Limerick are back. They beat Cork by 8. Fair enough, they were ransacked by Tip in the first 30 minutes. What did they beat Tip by in the wind-up?
5.
So they beat 8-5. They beat Waterford by 11 again, and they beat Cork by 16.
Look, it's an A+.
Hard go with. It's probably an A+ and a smiley face, and maybe an X.
Yeah, everyone is like, look at Kiley versus O'Neill, shows the importance of peaking at the right time. A++, says Joe Butler. This should send Cheddar into space with the cap and boiler suit to test the conditions of other planets, says Mark Harker. Don't be so sneery to Cheddar. He is a sound out man.
An absolute hero, yeah.
Now, Liam Sheedy and Tipperary. So this is the one. I'll let you start off and then
take it away, good sir.
Right, so Tipperary won 2 out of 5 league games. So we have that. And then we'll go into the Munster Championship. Beat Clare 323 to 222. Obviously, that black card to Aidan McCarthy was a bit of a turning point in that game. Then Munster final, up by 10 points, ended up losing by, was it even 11 points at one stage? But there was a 16-point turnaround anyway in a very short space of time. Very late about making switches there. Didn't bring through the young players that I was hoping for. Then lost against Waterford when I thought surely the younger players are going to be used in this game. Again, they weren't used, and for a finish, lost that game by 7, even though there was an opportunity to win that game. Nisha says, give Sheedy a C for claps. We all know what it's referring to there. Sheedy gets an A+ for halftime. Warrior reaction, says Will. So people are going in heavy on Sheedy.
Yeah, I suppose, like, in his third year, what you were expecting was to see an awful lot more youth and to see an influx of those younger players, and to see Tipperary playing in a different way and maybe going in a different direction. I don't think we saw. We don't think we saw enough of that. Did a kind of a real kind of cagey league. Drew at Limerick, beat Galway, drew at Cork. They were it was weird. They were kind of playing this game where even they didn't even have that many men inside at different times, and they were shooting from out the pitch, and it looked like they were trying to kind of really hold tight at the back. And then it kind of came to championship, and their defence was split open at times against Waterford in particular. The Aidan McCarthy, the penalty, and then the black card kind of puts a bit of an asterisk beside that game, although they did still go on and win it. And obviously, Evan Quilligan made a mistake for one of the Cannon goals. I don't know if they ever looked like winning the Waterford game either. I don't know.
Yeah, they could have, but they weren't the better team.
No, they weren't the better team.
I got to ask myself, was I impressed with the performance against Clare? No, I really, really wasn't. Was I impressed with the Limerick performance? It was, for a half an hour, it was the greatest thing I'd seen Tipperary do for years. And in the second half was the worst I've seen Tipperary play since 2012 semi-final against Kilkenny. It was that bad. And I know Tip only lost the game by 5, and that's the closest anyone's gotten to Limerick lately. But, I mean, that is the thing you think about when you think about that game. People talk about, Tip had a great first half, but after 30 minutes, it was obvious Tip are fading fast. And when you have that many people on the line analysing, I'm sure there's a case of, you look at the backs, you look at the midfielders, you look at the forwards, and we'll all try and analyse and we'll all have a chat. And then the changes just weren't made. So I think if the change, obviously I'd have started more the youth anyway, but if the changes were made a little bit sooner, maybe the flow could have been stemmed. They got a lot right.
Yeah, how much of the manager will get all the kudos, for the first half performance, which was unbelievable, and there was hellfire and brimstone going in at half time. How much, how should we say, not criticism, but how much of the brunt of the blame should be put on the manager then for not making the switches 5 minutes into the second half, 10 minutes into the second half, 15 minutes into the second half? How much of that did
who
he
else
take?
can you put it on? I'm not sure who else you can put it on. The players obviously aren't going to make substitutions. So given the quality that Tip have, and the fact that Cork used 10 of the team this year that played in the 2018 All-Ireland Under-21 final that lost to Tip, and Tip only had Jake Morris starting and Mark Keogh came on. To me, Tip needed to be losing with those Under-21 players if they're going to lose this year. And the thing I've been saying all along, that eventually energy is going to cost this Tipperary team, that you can't have that many players that are of an older age. So from my point of view, it was everything that I've been concerned about is the reason that Tip lost. It was well flagged. That the players are there as far as I'm concerned. So I think it's probably a D.
Just a quick one for you. How do you think the situation has been left for the next manager as a result of, let's say, what Sheedy did this year?
I just think there's Colin Bonner's playing catch up in terms of giving those players opportunities now. A lot of those players probably you would have expected that they would have had played a lot of league games by now. But you do have to say, to be fair to Liam Sheedy, that because of COVID, he didn't have as much training collectively with the team probably as you normally would have, didn't have as many challenge matches, probably didn't have as many in-house games, didn't have probably the same preparation that he would have wanted to have. So maybe he would have done it differently. But then I look at, in his 2 years, what has Liam Cahill done? And, he's taken a team that had a couple of very poor seasons results-wise and turned them around instantly. So look at what Brian Lohan has done in his 2 years in terms of here's where the team is and here's where it just seemed like it was moving up the way. So from my point of view, I just think there's a bit of catch-up for Bonner to do right now. What do you think?
Is D overly harsh for the one team that put it up to Limerick this year and the one team that looked like beating Limerick?
But that's the players that Tipperary have. They should, the notion that Tipperary should just put it up to Limerick, is insulting to me as far as I'm concerned. Now, people might think I overrate Tipperary or whatever, but look at the difference Mark Keogh made when he came on. I mean, that lad should have been starting all along as far as I was concerned. Paddy Cahill, sure, I'd been screaming for him to start for a year and a half. He comes in and he's to the manner born. I mean, that's just my opinion on it. I mean, you're obviously trying to draw it out of me as much as possible. But what like, has Bonner an awful lot of work to do now? Should those players have got game time? I mean, don't just turn it on me all the time.
No. Well, I do think they should have got game time. And if you look at the quality, Tip have in comparison to Kilkenny, Tip had a really bad year. When you look at the quality that they have, the Kilkenny don't have that quality. That's my reading of the situation anyway. And for Cody to be doing fine with a team that's transitioning with a lack of quality, that's over-reliant on one forward, I would say. And then for Liam Sheedy to be doing what Tipperary did, when you have loads of really good players that can absolutely light it up, be it Rona Maher, be it Noel McGrath, be it Jamie Canlon, be it Jason Ford, and several more. So I'd say I would have been leaning towards C-. I have to say. You're saying D. So maybe is D+ fair? Yeah,
okay, we'll go with that. We can't stick on Tipperary forever here. People will slate us, you know that. Let's see, Mark Keogh didn't do anything in 2020 against Tipperary, but
I know, but that's 16 months. That's or it's not. It's 8 months on. You have to expose players at that level. They have to be found out so that when they come back the next time, they're up to the task. That's just the way it is. The very few settle in and are just brilliant the first day out.
So Liam Cahill then with Waterford, poor the first day out against Clare, no doubt about that. Not great against Laois, but they got over that game. That was the main point. And then they worked their way to an All-Ireland semi-final, 16 points ahead against Galway. So it was a brilliant performance, and obviously the 14 men caught up with them. What are you thinking then with Galway or with Waterford?
I'm thinking B territory, but not sure kind of what direction I'd be leaning towards. This year, obviously, they were beaten by Clare in the championship. They had big championship wins over Galway. Obviously, a Galway side not going particularly well. Laois, who else did they beat? They beat someone else of note in this year's championship, didn't they?
Tipperary.
Sorry. So they beat some pretty big guns, and you have to say Tipperary are a big gun. The same failings came back to roost against Limerick. Are they any based on the Limerick performance in the All-Ireland semi-final? Are they any further down the line than they were in 2020?
I don't think so, but you do have to take into account no Tyke de Burka, no Irla Daly, Pádraig Mannion. It'd be interesting to see if he works his way back into the team now that he's on the comeback trail with Ballygunner. Is there someone else missing as well? Stephen O'Keefe wasn't there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I love
the team.
Yeah, I love Cahill's ability just to get on with things and just get another player in there, do what they have to do. But I think a B- would be harsh. I think a B+ would be generous. I think a B is probably about right.
Yeah, I think so.
I think he's done a lot of good. I definitely don't think they didn't regress. Well, his grade for 2020 might have been on memory, maybe an A- on memory. That doesn't mean they've regressed this year. They just mightn't have got any further, and that's a lot to do with the personnel that they're missing. So maybe you could say in one way, I'll put it this way: did we write off Waterford's chances when Tyke de Burka and Stephen O'Keefe stepped out? We probably did. I'd say we probably did.
Some people are questioning how they played here. I mean, to me, in that All-Ireland semi-final, there was a real issue with just the players themselves and their basic skills breaking down the semi-final in ways that they shouldn't, like simple hand passes, and they were spilling them. And a couple of things with Shane Bennett, who's a really good player, but he's just making these strange mistakes. One time planting the feet around the middle of the field and getting blocked down and turned upside down. And but then the flip side is he's developed new goalkeepers. He hasn't developed them, but he's blooded Billy Nolan and Sean O'Brien. They both did fine when I saw them playing. Obviously moving Shane Bennett to a new position, that was a qualified success. Patrick Kern, we saw a bit more of him this year. Peter Hogan, he developed. So players developed, but I would question if they're any closer to Limerick, and then from that point of view, you would have to be concerned and think maybe that takes a little bit off their rating.
He's got Austin Gleeson playing consistently as well, which you'd probably have to say that no other manager has done over a consistent period of time. Like he's had 2 really solid championships with Waterford the last 2 years. I don't think that happened. Like I think he was very good in 2016. He was all right in 2017. But he has got him playing to a high level again.
And a good point there from Flash, the free taking in that first quarter.
Totally, yeah.
It killed him.
Totally,
so, I mean, Liam Cahill isn't taking the frees and Stephen Bennett normally nails them. So
I think I think they'll know as well. I think he'll surely have learned that they can't take on Limerick physically like they did in that first quarter. Like they were spent after the first quarter in many ways.
Were they, or were they spent because they kept missing chances?
Maybe, and maybe you throw how many weeks in a row they played into the mix as well. Then maybe 2. Yeah. But I think B is fair. I think a B is fair.
A B is fair. Then Davey Fitz, that's the final one, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of comments flying in for this because they always do when it comes to Davey Fitz. We'll go through the league. Obviously, they were on the weaker side of the league. I saw them lose by. They lost. Well, they were down by 14 points against Kilkenny in the league, and they're absolutely cat that day. But we're kind of dismissing the league to some degree here. They still did win 3 and draw 1, so they weren't that far off in the league. Hammered Laois, took Kilkenny to extra time and got blown away in extra time, eventually losing that by 8 points. Then
bringing on some of the same players again as well.
Bringing back on lads that were cramped, yeah. And I mean that counted massively against John Myler's chances against Limerick in 2018, and obviously, it has to be something we factor in here. And then losing to Clare in Thurles in that qualifier game, and it was, they went so far behind early on. They were often playing with nobody. It seemed like nobody inside the 45 of their own attacking half of the field. Really disjointed performance. You were kind of came away wondering. All this talk of like 2 and 3 different formations during the game, and you're wondering, well, what is actually the plan here? So it's hard to be too complimentary of it given the season that it was overall.
Yeah, one complimentary thing I would say is that, but it wasn't as bad as last year. It definitely wasn't as bad as last year. I can't remember what grade he got last year. I think it might have been an F. I can't remember. I don't think it's quite down on that territory, but like. Yeah, they could have beaten Kilkenny. They didn't. They were totally found out in extra time, we would say. And the game against Clare, it wasn't all but over after 20 minutes, but they were totally chasing the game after 20 minutes, and they were never able to get close enough to them. I think it was 6 points in the wind-up, but they were never able to get really close to them.
It was actually 3.
Was it 3 at full time?
3, yeah. 225 to 222 against Clare.
I think I must have got a goal near the very end. I can't remember that game as well as I should. But I think you're looking at a D probably area.
I think you are, yeah. And it was just the manner of how they played at times. It was just, and like I didn't even like watching them this year.
No.
So they were good against Kilkenny, and they made a good comeback against Clare, so you have to give them sort of positives for that. So I think it's around the D territory, yeah.
There's a lot of bad ratings this year. we got a bad class this year.
Yeah, and we're going to have to blame John Kiley for a lot of that.
Well, that's true. Well, it's like if you're in a class, and just say it's honours maths, and you have this one student who is an absolute genius.
A swat.
Yeah, an absolute genius, and then you have maybe a few messers, and that's kind of the way it is. And you have one person who's this far ahead, so far ahead of everyone. What are we looking at? A plus, next best, a B.
Yeah.
Liam Cahill next best with a B. No one even remotely close. And to be fair, that's fairly accurate on what we saw this year.
Yeah. So we're sticking with a D then, a flat D, is it?
Flat D, I think. Yeah. Flat D.
Fair enough. If you enjoyed this piece of content, please follow us on YouTube by hitting the subscribe button in the bottom right-hand corner of the page, which helps the channel grow. And if you want audio podcasts, go to patreon.com/OurGame.